Hey everybody, what is up? Chad Wesley Smith here for Juggernaut Training Systems and Juggernaut AI. And today I'm going to be continuing our series on the scientific principles of strength training with principle number 3, fatigue management. So if you haven't yet, go back, watch the video on specificity, which is all about developing the underlying systems of success for your sport, powerlifting in this case. And it creates the framework for which all other training decisions are made. Then we talk about the principle of overload, which is basically how hard do you need to train to drive the stimulus and adaptations to make improvements. And now with that hard training, we need to apply the principle of fatigue management, because if you can't recover from it, it doesn't really matter that much if you did it. As always, our videos are brought to you by the Juggernaut AI app. So if you want to get the smartest program for you, totally customized based on gender, age, strength, experience, where do you miss your lifts, your weak points, are you trying to gain weight, lose weight, all that type of stuff. Whether you're a competitive powerlifter or not, we've got powerlifting, power building, bench only, and newly introduced strongman training on the Juggernaut AI app with more great programs to come. Go check out a 2-week free trial from the link down in the description or by visiting juggernautai.app. So fatigue management is critical because, of course you have to train hard, and that hard training that you do, it's going to build up, to build up that fitness, fatigue comes with it. And if too much fatigue builds up and you can't properly recover, then you're going to get into various levels of overtrainedness. So we're going to talk, and I'm going to use a lot of little acronyms, abbreviations, I suppose, of these different volume landmarks. And understanding the volume landmarks are going to be really helpful to make sure that you're training within recoverable ranges. So we're going to talk about maintenance volume, MV, minimum effective volume, MEV, maximum adaptive volume, MAV, and maximum recoverable volume, MRV. So as you look at what is important to do to manage recovery, training within those recoverable volume ranges is going to be the first step. No matter how well you sleep or how much you eat, or how much if you have an IV drip in all day, and as soon as you finish training you just lay on the couch in Normatec boots, it won't matter if you've done too much training that you're not going to be able to recover from. So we need to train within our MRV, our maximum recoverable volume. So most of our training is going to occur between MEV and then the higher end ranges of MAV, maximum adaptive volume. After that, yes, sleep and nutrition are going to be, training within the recoverable volumes. Sleep and nutrition, that's going to take care of like 90% of recovery. And then the stuff beyond that, passive recovery modalities can have, some application, but are very overvalued by most people. So as we look at the states of fatigue management, first up, we've got normal training. You're training within your recoverable volumes. Then we can get into overreaching, which can be functional by design or non-functional, kind of unplanned overreaching. And you might want to have functional overreaching, right before you take a deload week, because you know that you're going to have this extra recovery built in. Non-functional overreaching, really never want to have that. That's kind of going to be a mistake or some unaccounted for variables in your training. And then we have overtraining, this kind of boogeyman of the strength training and performance world. And overtraining definitely is a real thing. It's going to be a chronic state of non-functional overreaching. But for powerlifters, unless you're pairing powerlifting with other very physical, demanding, stressful hobbies, job, lifestyle, it's pretty unlikely that a powerlifter is going to get into a true state of overtraining, because you'll probably just give up before you get there because you're going to feel really bad. Now in sports like football or CrossFit or MMA, where there's a lot of different components to the training, and some of them are a little bit harder to account for how much volume you're doing, because the volume is not as black and white as sets times reps times weight, but there's just different time and intensity components to it. Yeah, it's a bit more likely that you get into overtraining there, but you got to be a combination of tough and dumb to overtrain for powerlifting. So I'm not too worried about that. So as we look at functional overreaching, that's going to be intentionally training up to or maybe slightly exceeding what you currently consider to be your MRV, your maximum recoverable volume, and doing that because you know you have a time of extended recovery coming up after that, whether that's a light day or a series of light days that we call a deload week. So the deloads, planned light days or deload weeks are going to be important, some of your most important recovery tools and fatigue management tools. A deload week, I like to pre-plan deload weeks. The users of the Juggernaut AI app know that they're going to get a deload week, every 4th to 6th week typically. We could even extend that range out to maybe every 3rd week if you're really, really big and strong and lifting these huge weights. You might need a light week every 3rd week. You could potentially structure something like that in with the way that we use undulating periodization in the Juggernaut AI app and stretch that out a little bit and not have a true deload until like the 4th or 5th week. But the 2 on, 1 off paradigm of 2 weeks of hard training, then a deload, that I typically reserve more for like explosive performance athletes like sprinters or throwers, but not out of the question that a powerlifter could use it. And then we can go all the way to the other side of things with maybe deloading every 8th week for more beginner lifters who just aren't that capable of generating the amount of fatigue that would warrant them having a deload week. But, more often every 4 to 6 weeks is what we really deal with. The purpose of a deload week is to dissipate that fatigue that you've built up so then you can come back and train harder and harder. So let's say if we were deloading between consecutive hypertrophy blocks, and in hypertrophy we're trying to overload the amount of volume that you're doing, go and check out the Designing a Hypertrophy Block video, which I'll try and link up in the corner or down in the description, or you can just search for it or scroll back a little bit. So because we're trying to overload the volume that we're doing, let's look at that as a number of sets. So if you went 2 consecutive hypertrophy blocks divided by a deload week, you might train the squat, let's say for 10 work sets, then 12 work sets, then 14 work sets, and then in a deload week drop back down to like 7 or 8 work sets, and then start a little bit higher than you were before, go 11, 13, 15. So we're 10, 12, 14, 7 or 8, 11, 13, 15, and we're pushing our capacity as we go and building up. So what does that deload week look like? A lot of different ways that you can effectively do it, but making a 10 to 20% reduction in intensity and a reduction to 60 to 75% of normal volume, not 60 to 75% reduction to 60 to 75%. So if your MAV, most of your training is occurring within this maximum adaptive volume, and that was 10 sets, then during a deload week, you're probably going to do 6 or 7 sets, maybe up to 8 sets. If your work sets during normal training, you're doing 300 pounds for 8 reps. Now during a deload week, you're probably going to do 270 pounds on the high end, a 10% reduction, or 240 pounds on the low end, a 20% reduction, somewhere in between there for a similar amount of reps. You can also reduce the amount of reps if you want to stay heavier and maybe do if you were doing 300 for 8 during normal training, and you don't want to make too big of a reduction because, some people, and I think this is more psychological than physiological, but they feel weak coming out of a deload week if they go too light. So maybe your deload week is on the heavier side of things and you do, 280 or 290, but for 6 reps instead of the 300 for 8 that you were doing. So it's a smaller reduction, but the stronger you get, the bigger the reduction needs to be because the more fatigue you'll have to decay. And that's kind of the balance that we're trying to strike during the deload week, is we need to go light enough to decay fatigue, but heavy enough to retain strength and technique. And unless you are very new to training, it is extremely unlikely that you are becoming weaker, that you are losing some of your strength adaptations during a 1-week deload period. So mistakes that people are making in fatigue management in regards to competitive powerlifting: you could be doing too much volume too close to the competition. Check out our Designing a Peaking Block video for more on the peaking design and taper. But you don't want to be 2-3 weeks out from a meet and you're doing the same amount of volume that you were doing 6, 8, 10 weeks out from the meet, because you're not going to be able to decay that fatigue and manage the fitness fatigue relationship as effectively as you should to exceed your training performances by the most possible and have the most effective taper and peak into the meet. if you're training at chronically high intensities, so throughout all of your training, especially earlier phases like hypertrophy and strength, which, yeah, you want to train heavy, but it's not important that your 1 rep max is as high as it can ever be during a hypertrophy block, because you're not going to have a surprise powerlifting meet that you need to be ready for, at the end of your 3rd week of hypertrophy. Honestly, it doesn't matter what your 1 rep max is at that point. It matters how are you setting yourself up to have a higher 1 rep max in 8, 10, 12 weeks, whenever your meet actually is. That's the day that matters. You don't always need to be ready for the meet, because you don't always have a meet and they don't come up by surprise. Very typically at maybe some sort of powerlifting kumite that you just found out about. And then the other issue that a lot of people are going to run into with a misapplication of fatigue management is avoiding or not utilizing deload weeks. So for most of my powerlifting career, I was taking a deload every 4th week. In some cases, I went out to every 6th week or 7th week, even in the off season. And I get questions a lot of times about, do I really need a deload, or can I take a reactive deload? Can I just deload once I feel bad? Can I deload? Yes, it is possible to do reactive deloads, but I'm not a big fan of them in a lot of scenarios, and this is why. If you're getting ready for a competition, that competition is on a fixed date. You have all this specific work that you need to do to get ready for it. I like to do that through phases of hypertrophy, strength, and peaking, but maybe I'm in hypertrophy and I start my hypertrophy 16 weeks out, and I'm rolling, I'm 15, 14, 13, 12 weeks out. And when I would normally take a deload at like 11 weeks out and transition to strength, but if I'm feeling great in my hypertrophy and I keep that rolling, and now I get to, 8 weeks out before, oh man, I'm really feeling run down, I better take my reactive deload week now. Now, not only have you maybe accumulated more fatigue than you're going to be able to decay in that one week, now you've also condensed the time you have for strength and peaking, because your meet didn't push back with your extended training before the deload. The meet stayed in the same place. So now you're cutting into the other training time that you have, the other blocks and the other specific qualities that you're looking to develop. So if you're training for a specific meet, I'm not a big fan of reactive deload really at all, because of it messing up the training calendar. If you're just training to train and get stronger, yeah, it's definitely more of a possibility then. But the issue that I would encourage you to be wary of is deloading after you really need the deload, that you waited a week too long and you've gone, from what could have been functional overreaching with a planned deload into non-functional overreaching, and getting yourself closer to overtraining, which is going to take a longer time to come back from. So if you're experienced enough and disciplined enough to understand, or you have some more objective markers around your training, like some velocity-based training, using recovery questionnaires, using things, even like HRV tends to be a little bit of a lagging indicator. But if you're using some tools like that and basing your reactive deload off of that, when not preparing for a meet, just training to train and be the strongest version of yourself that you can, then I can get on board with it a little bit more. But a lot of times the risk kind of outweighs the reward. Okay, you got one extra week of hard training before you took a deload. In the grand scheme of things, like, how much of a difference did that really make? It may have been more personally satisfying to you, but a year from now, how did it affect what your PRs are? 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I'd rather stay a little bit too recovered than not recovered enough. But again, the other side of that is you're overusing deload weeks, and you're deloading much more frequently than you need to, or you're never training hard enough to warrant the deload in the first place. And that's what I see more people doing, is they're like, I don't need a deload, this week. Like, well, you should have gone as heavy as you were supposed to the week or two before that, and then you would feel like you needed the deload when it was planned. So let deloads, and kind of the next point about a misapplication of fatigue management is people who are resistant to having deloads, they don't let their deloads be deloads. They want to have the hardest deload week possible. And I see this a lot with CrossFitters, like they want to have the hardest light day that they can. And instead of just going in and doing the recovery-based work or technique work or aerobic development work, then they're like, well, I rode a 5K and then I started snatching, but I felt good, so I went heavy. And if your light or your low days become medium, then your high days are going to become medium as well, and you're going to kind of have this monostructural training that's not going to be as effective and manage fatigue as well. So that's kind of people who want to avoid it, and then other people will even overuse them more, and they'll just not do anything for the entire week of a deload. And I see that in YouTube comments and stuff sometimes. I prefer to just not do anything that the whole week. You won't recover as well by not doing anything as you will by doing light work. All right. The light work is going to get the blood flow to the muscles, is going to help promote recovery. It's going to help retain technique. And yeah, the squat, bench, and deadlift are not so complex that after a week of not doing them, you're going to forget how to do them. You know, the way that I forgot how to swing a golf club yesterday. Definitely wasn't haunting me for the last 24 hours. But they're not that technical and that precise and refined that you're going to forget how to do them. But you're not going to get better at doing them, and you might get a little bit worse. And if your goal is to be as strong as you possibly can on this one day that matters most, your powerlifting meet, then go do a 30 or 40 minute deload workout. Even if it's really light, you're going to be better off doing something than nothing in that type of situation. So final part of fatigue management that I want to talk about is what's typically overuse of recovery modalities. Like I said, training within recoverable volumes, sleeping enough, probably 7 to 9 hours a night of quality sleep. If you can get a nap in here or there, a lot of really serious and accomplished athletes are big nappers. I would do that. Eating enough calories to support body weight maintenance and support the training you're doing is going to be important there. If you're cutting, which is a real thing that people are doing, and it's not bad necessarily, but you don't recover as well when you're cutting. So don't be unintentionally cutting and not eating enough to support the training that you're doing if your plan is not to cut. So as long as you're doing those things, you're going to be doing most of the stuff that you can for recovery. But if you want to put on top of it, a little bit of like soft tissue therapy, and studies and stuff around this are very ambiguous, dubious as at best. Most of them kind of come down to like, well, if you like it, then it has some stress management ability for you and can be kind of useful, because that is the other biggest piece of fatigue management, is managing your stress. And stress is not just an argument with the significant other or a tough day at work or hard training. It's all of those things. Your body can't differentiate between those different stressors. It just knows, stress and stimulus and fatigue. So if you do have a very high stress lifestyle, whether that's other physical activities or stressful relationships or whatever it is, managing those is going to be a big part of fatigue management. And sometimes soft tissue therapy, like a massage, if that helps you relax, even though the structural changes to your muscles aren't probably what you might think that they are, if it helps you relax, that's going to be useful from fatigue management. So things like ice baths, which do remove some inflammation artificially, and dampen the adaptation signal to the body. It's kind of a negative from a stimulus adaptation standpoint, but can be a slight positive from a recovery standpoint, especially as you get closer to competition or in concentrated recovery periods like a deload week. I wouldn't use them chronically, like every time after you squat. I wouldn't take an ice bath. If your goal is to be as big and strong as you can, on the other side of the temperature therapy kind of thing, saunas. Well, if you are trying to sit in a 230-degree sauna, like I see, Joe Rogan and Laird Hamilton post about sometimes, and you're blurring the line between like, am I recovering in a sauna or am I, low and slow cooking myself? I wouldn't do that for extended periods of time. But if, 10, 15 minutes in the sauna helps you relax, in the mornings or after a hard day, that can be useful. Just don't do it so much that you're dehydrating yourself. People use saunas to cut weight for competitions. I would never consider cutting weight, a benefit for recovery. And then you've got other stuff, like I said, the different soft tissue therapies, whether that's self-myofascial release kind of things or hands-on manual therapies. Those are a little bit more effective, but that's 5-10 minutes. If you get a massage for an hour, awesome. But train hard, eat well, sleep enough, manage your stress. You don't need to have a recovery workout on top of that for the most part for powerlifters. So hopefully from this video, you're taking away the understanding and need to balance hard overloading training and effective fatigue management. So we want to train within our volume landmarks. So we're doing at least maintenance volume, MV, but mostly training between MEV, minimum effective volume, and MRV, maximum recoverable volume, in that kind of sweet spot, which is going to be your MAV, maximum adaptive volume. Sometimes you might bump up close to or slightly over what you perceive to be your MRV, your maximum recoverable volume, and having some functional overreaching there before a planned deload week where you're making 10 to 20% reductions in intensity at 60 to 75% of your normal volume. If you want to do that reactively, I wouldn't do that if you're a competitive powerlifter, but if you're just training to train hard, go for it. But you're still going to be better off doing it a little bit before you think you're going to need it than after you know you really need it and are maybe non-functionally overreached at that point. So hopefully you understand how to recover better from your training now and how to manage that fatigue. If you enjoyed the video, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you're interested in a 2-week free trial of the smartest program for you, visit the link down in the description, Juggernaut AI app at juggernautai.app, and check it out. Again, powerlifting, power building, bench only, strongman, more to come, 4.9 stars on thousands and thousands of reviews. So you know it's good. Thanks for watching.